I stood in my office, surrounded by the comforting scent of old books and leather, watching Marcus through the security feed as he smugly stored what he thought was my signed power of attorney in his briefcase. The crystal tumbler in my hand caught the late afternoon light, scattering amber reflections across the mahogany desk. My desk in my law firm, though he still didn't know that. "Everything go as planned?" Sarah asked, entering quietly through the hidden door behind my bookcase. As my head of security and closest confidant, she'd been instrumental in orchestrating today's performance. "Perfectly," I replied, taking a measured sip of the aged scotch, a gift from my late father when I made partner. He didn't even read what he was countersigning, too excited about finally getting control of what he thinks is my trust fund. Sarah's lips curved into a knowing smile as she settled into one of the leather chairs facing my desk. Men like Marcus never do read the fine print, do they? Too convinced of their own brilliance. I set down the tumbler, remembering the moment. Earlier today, when Marcus had presented me with the papers, his eyes gleaming with barely concealed triumph as he'd explained how these documents would protect our future together. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The same eyes that had watched me build what he thought was a small private practice, never suspecting that Johnston & Associates, one of the city's most prestigious law firms, was actually Morrison & Partners, my partners. He still thinks I'm just a struggling independent lawyer, I mused, pulling up the real-time surveillance of Marcus at his favorite bar, already celebrating with his equally ambitious friends. Working out of that small office downtown, barely making ends meet, desperate to prove myself. The corner office we stood in now, 40 stories above the city with its sweeping views and discreet private elevator, told a different story. One Marcus would soon discover. The timing couldn't be better, Sarah noted, reviewing something on her tablet. The Morrison merger announcement goes public tomorrow morning. Every major news outlet has the press release ready to go. I nodded, thinking of the carefully crafted narrative we'd built over the past year. Marcus had pursued me relentlessly after we met at a charity gala, drawn to what he perceived as my combination of social connections and financial vulnerability. A trust fund baby who'd never quite succeeded in her career, the perfect target for a man with expensive tastes and ruthless ambition. "Pull up his financials," I instructed, moving to stand by the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city sprawled below, its lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. Sarah's fingers flew across her tablet. "Credit card debt just hit 6 figures," she reported. "He's been charging everything to cards in your name, or what he thinks is your name. The prenup he had you sign last week would have made you responsible for all shared marital expenses retroactively." I smiled, remembering the careful performance I'd given while signing those papers. The slight trembling of my hand, the nervous questions about whether this was really necessary, the ultimate acquiescence when he'd insisted it was just a formality, all while the real prenup, the one he'd unknowingly signed today, sat waiting in my desk drawer. "What's our timeline looking like?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Every step had been meticulously planned, every contingency accounted for. First news alerts hit at 6 a.m. Stock market opens at 9:30. By lunch, everyone will know that Morrison & Partners has acquired Johnston & Associates, with the mysterious Elizabeth Morrison finally stepping into the public eye as managing partner. I checked my watch. My father's old Patek Philippe, the one possession I'd kept from my real life while playing the role of struggling lawyer Elizabeth Johnston. In less than 12 hours, Marcus would discover just how completely he'd been outplayed. "And the other papers he signed today?" Sarah asked, though she already knew. She'd helped draft them after all. Full admission of attempt to defraud, detailed confession of his plan to seize control of my assets, and a very ironclad agreement to repay every penny he spent in my name, with substantial interest. I turned from the window, my reflection sharp and clear in the darkening glass. All perfectly legal and witnessed by his own chosen notary. Sarah stood, gathering her tablet. The cameras in his office caught him bragging to his partner about the plan. Audio's crystal clear. He laid out the whole scheme, right down to his plans for after you signed everything over. "Send me the footage," I said, returning to my desk. "I want to review it before tomorrow's performance." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. As Sarah left through the hidden door, I pulled up the evening's final report. Marcus was on his fourth whiskey, regaling his friends with tales of his clever maneuvering, his brilliant legal strategy, his foolproof plan to secure his future. If only he knew that with every boastful word, every arrogant gesture, he was only adding to the evidence we'd use tomorrow. I picked up my father's old law books, the ones that had first inspired me to follow in his footsteps, to build something he would have been proud of. "Always read the fine print, princess," he used to say. "That's where the real story lives." Tomorrow, Marcus would learn that lesson the hard way. But tonight I had one more role to play, the trusting fiancé, celebrating our future together over dinner at his favorite restaurant. I straightened my jacket, checking my reflection one last time. The mask of naive vulnerability slipped perfectly into place, a costume I'd worn so well this past year. Just a few more hours, and then the real Elizabeth Morrison would finally step into the light. After all, revenge is a dish best served with impeccable legal documentation. The maître d' at Le Cinquième welcomed me with practiced deference, leading me to the private corner table where Marcus waited. His face lit up with predatory satisfaction as I approached, no doubt already counting my non-existent millions in his mind. "Darling," he stood, pressing a kiss to my cheek. The scent of expensive whiskey clung to him, along with the subtle hint of victory. I ordered the 82 Bordeaux to celebrate. I slid into my seat, noting how his Rolex, purchased on my fraudulent credit line, caught the intimate lighting. "Celebrate?" I asked, infusing my voice with just the right touch of innocent curiosity. "Our future." He raised his glass, eyes gleaming. "Now that all the tedious paperwork is finished, we can focus on the wedding. I've been thinking about St. Bart's for the ceremony." Sarah's voice whispered in my discreet earpiece. "His travel agent just charged $50,000 to your card for preliminary wedding venue deposits." I took a delicate sip of wine, mentally adding it to his mounting tab. "St. Bart's sounds lovely, though perhaps we should wait until my practice is more stable." I let vulnerability creep into my tone. The office rent was due today, and I barely made it. Marcus reached across the table, patting my hand with calculated sympathy. "Don't worry about money anymore, sweetheart. I'll handle everything from now on. In fact," he paused for effect, "I've been thinking it might be best if you sold the practice. Focus on our life together instead." Through my earpiece, Sarah's dry voice reported, "He's already listed your downtown office space for sale online, using your forged signature on the documentation. Sell my practice?" I widened my eyes, watching him practically salivate at my apparent distress. "But my clients will understand completely," he smoothly intercepted. "Besides, once we're married, you won't need to work. I've got big plans for us." "He's texting his broker," Sarah murmured in my ear, "instructing him to prepare for major stock purchases tomorrow morning using your power of attorney." I forced my hands to tremble slightly as I reached for my water. Glass. "I suppose you know best about these things." Marcus's smile widened. "Trust me, darling. By this time tomorrow, everything will be perfect. If he only knew how right he was, though not in the way he imagined." I excused myself to the ladies' room, where Sarah was waiting in an elegant black dress that perfectly suited her cover as a casual diner. "The news embargo lifts in 8 hours, she confirmed, touching up her lipstick. "Every major financial outlet has the story ready to go. The merger announcement. Your public debut as Elizabeth Morrison. The firm's complete restructuring. Checked my own reflection, adjusting the strand of simple pearls I wore. Another piece of my carefully crafted costume. And his recent activities? All documented. The fraudulent credit charges, the forged signatures, the recorded conversations with his broker about liquidating your assets. His partner just called him, by the way. They're planning to meet at 8 a.m. to finalize the paperwork for selling your practice. I smiled, thinking of the surprise that awaited them in those documents. Make sure we have security ready. I want them both there when the news breaks. Back at the table, Marcus was ordering another bottle of wine, his movements getting sloppier as celebration overcame caution. I've been thinking, he slurred slightly. We should renovate your little apartment after the wedding. Turn it into something more suitable. More suitable? I echoed, knowing Sarah was recording every word. For a woman of your new status, he proclaimed grandly. Can't have my wife living like a struggling lawyer anymore. Though, he chuckled, I suppose technically you won't own it by then anyway. Sarah's voice was tight with controlled anger in my ear. Just forwarded you the listing. He's already working with a real estate agent to sell your penthouse, using the power of attorney he thinks he has. I forced a tremulous smile. You're so good to me, Marcus. I don't know what I'd do without you. Don't worry your pretty head about it. He reached for my hand again, his grip possessive. Just leave everything to me. As he launched into detailed plans for spending my supposed fortune, I thought about the real documents waiting in my office. The ones that would reveal not just his attempted fraud, but his entire history of financial manipulation. Every woman he'd swindled, every deal he'd corrupted, every scheme he'd orchestrated, all meticulously documented and ready for tomorrow's revelation. Another toast, he declared, raising his glass unsteadily. To us, and to never having to worry about money again. I clinked my glass against his, watching him drain it with the confidence of a man who thought he'd won. In less than 12 hours, that confidence would shatter like crystal against marble. To us, I echoed softly, and to getting exactly what we deserve. Dawn painted the city skyline in shades of anticipation as I stood in my true office, watching multiple screens track Marcus's movements. He'd arrived early at his law firm, practically bouncing with eagerness as he prepared to begin liquidating what he thought were my assets. His broker's already on the line, Sarah reported, entering with 2 coffee cups. They're discussing which stocks to sell first once the market opens. I accepted the coffee, savoring its rich aroma. And his partner? David's just pulled into the parking garage, carrying the sales contract for your struggling practice. Sarah's tablet displayed the security feed of a silver Mercedes parking. They've already drafted the transfer paperwork. I checked the time, 5:55 a.m. In 5 minutes, the first news alerts would hit. I'd chosen this timing carefully, knowing both men would be early to work but not yet checking their phones or emails. Pull up the newsroom feeds, I instructed, moving to stand before the wall of monitors. Dozens of journalists sat ready at their desks, final drafts of the Morrison merger story waiting to go live. 7 a.m. Through the security cameras, I watched Marcus straighten his tie, rehearsing what seemed to be a condescending speech in his reflection. Probably practicing how he'd explained to me that selling my practice was for my own good. Bottom. David stepped off the elevator, briefcase bulging with fraudulent documents. The 2 men greeted each other with conspiratorial grins, already counting their imaginary profits. A.M. Satellite trucks pulling up outside both buildings, Sarah noted. Everyone's in position. 6 a.m. The first alerts hit. I watched through the cameras as phones began buzzing across the newsroom floors. Reporters snapped to attention, fingers flying across keyboards as they rushed to be first with the breaking story. Morrison and Partners announces landmark merger, Elizabeth. Morrison steps into public eye. Legal world rocked by surprise acquisition. Through the security feed, I saw the exact moment the first notification reached Marcus's phone. His hand froze halfway through another practiced gesture, face contorting in confusion as he read the headline. "He's pulling up the full article," Sarah narrated, monitoring his screen activity. And there it is. Marcus's face drained of color as he stared at my professional headshot, not as Elizabeth Johnston, struggling lawyer, but as Elizabeth Morrison, managing partner of one of the city's most powerful firms. The same photo would be appearing on every major news site and financial channel within minutes. David's seen it too, I noted, watching the second man nearly drop his phone. How long until they check the documents? Already happening, Sarah confirmed. Marcus is pulling out the power of attorney papers now. His hands are shaking so badly he can barely hold them. I moved closer to the monitor, unwilling to miss a moment of his realization. There it was, the widening of his eyes, as he finally read the fine print. The documents he'd so smugly obtained weren't a power of attorney at all, but rather a detailed confession of his own fraudulent activities. "Security teams in position?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Every detail had been planned, for weeks. "Ready on your signal. Though you might want to wait a moment, he's about to find the rest." Marcus was frantically pawing through his briefcase now, pulling out document after document. Each page revealed another layer of his own admissions, every signature he'd so carelessly added, now testifying to his guilt. Call coming in from his broker, Sarah reported. Apparently, he's demanding they proceed with the planned sales. Broker's refusing. They've already received notification that the power of attorney is void. I switched my attention to another screen, where financial reporters were dissecting the merger announcement. Morrison and Partners stock was already climbing in pre-market trading, while shares in companies connected to Marcus's various schemes began to tumble. "His credit cards are being declined," Sarah added with quiet satisfaction. "All accounts linked to your name have been frozen pending fraud investigation." Through the camera feed, I watched Marcus attempt 3 different cards at the office. Coffee machine, each transaction rejected. A small thing, perhaps, but symbolic of the cascade of failures about to descend. "Security alerts at both buildings," Sarah noted. "They're trying to access the executive floors. Should I give the signal?" I held up my hand, waiting. Marcus and David were huddled over a computer now, presumably searching for some legal loophole, some way to salvage their scheme. Their expressions shifted from confusion to horror as they discovered that every document, every transaction, every fraudulent plan had been meticulously documented and reported to the relevant authorities. "Now," I said softly, watching as security teams converged on both men. "Let's introduce ourselves properly." I straightened my suit jacket. Chanel this time, not the discount brands I'd worn as Elizabeth Johnston, and headed for the private elevator. After all, it was only polite to be there in person when someone's carefully constructed fraud collapses around them. "Shall I alert the prosecutors?" Sarah asked, matching my stride. "Give them a few minutes," I replied, watching the security teams escort Marcus and David into separate conference rooms. "Let them sweat a bit first. After all, they spent a year teaching me about patience." The private elevator doors opened silently onto Marcus's floor. Through the glass walls, I could see him pacing the conference room like a caged animal, phone pressed desperately to his ear. From his expression, his calls weren't being answered. "His brokers blocked his number," Sarah reported quietly, walking beside me. "Same with his banker, financial advisor, and 3 different credit card companies. The fraud alerts have locked everything down." We paused at the corner, watching David being interviewed by 2 serious-looking investigators in the adjacent conference room. His face had taken on the sickly pallor of a man watching his future crumble. "Everything's recorded?" I confirmed, though I already knew the answer. Every word. The conference rooms were specially wired last month during the routine maintenance visit. Sarah's tablet displayed multiple audio feeds. We're getting crystal clear admission of intent to defraud. I smoothed my skirt, enjoying the feel of proper silk against my skin after a year of bargain rack polyester. Time to make my entrance, I think. Marcus's head snapped up as I entered, his eyes widening as he took in my transformed appearance. Gone was the timid, struggling lawyer in off-the-rack suits. In her place stood Elizabeth Morrison, every inch the managing partner of a premier law firm. What? He started, then stopped, swallowing hard. Elizabeth, what is this? This? I settled gracefully into the chair at the head of the conference table. This is what reading the fine print looks like, darling. Sarah placed a thick folder on the table, the sound making Marcus flinch. Your signed confessions, I explained, watching him struggle to maintain composure. Every detail of your planned fraud, documented in your own handwriting and witnessed by your chosen notary. That's impossible, he sputtered, reaching for the papers with trembling hands. I never signed. Oh, but you did, I interrupted smoothly. Yesterday afternoon, in fact. You were so eager to get my signature on what you thought was a power of attorney, you never bothered to read what you were countersigning. Through the glass, I could see David watching our exchange, his own face draining of color as realization set in. The investigators with him were laying out similar documents, each page bearing his signature. The merger announcement, Marcus began, is entirely real, I confirmed. Morrison and Partners has indeed acquired Johnston and Associates, though perhaps I should clarify, I own both firms. I always have. His legs seemed to give out as he sank into a chair. But your practice, the struggling business, was an elaborate stage, carefully designed for your benefit. I opened the folder, extracting his credit card statements. Though, I must admit, you exceeded my expectations with these. Charging hundreds of thousands to fraudulent accounts in my name. That's rather ambitious, even for you. I can explain, he started, but Sarah chose that moment to project his recorded conversations onto the conference room wall. His own voice filled the room, bragging about how he'd finally found the perfect mark. A trust fund baby desperate to prove herself, too naive to protect her assets properly. Your explanations are all here. I gestured to the screen, where he could be seen detailing his plans to his co-conspirators, along with every email, every phone call, every meeting where you plotted to defraud me. Did you really think I wouldn't investigate after what happened to Claire? He stiffened at the name. Who? Claire Matthews, your previous target. The one who lost everything to you 3 years ago? I extracted another file. She works for me now, by the way. Has been quite helpful in documenting your pattern of behavior. Through the glass, I could see David attempting to bolt from his conference room. The security team smoothly intercepted him, escorting him back to his seat. The police are here, Sarah announced quietly, along with representatives from the SEC and the Bar Association's Ethics Committee. Marcus lunged for his phone again, fingers shaking as he tried to dial. My lawyer, I need to call. Your law firm dropped you as a client an hour ago, I informed him. They've received copies of all this documentation. No reputable attorney will touch your case now. His face contorted with sudden rage. You planned this. You trapped me. No, Marcus, you trapped yourself. I stood, enjoying how he shrank back slightly. I simply made sure there were witnesses. Sarah's tablet chimed softly. The press is assembling in the main lobby, she reported. They're requesting statements about the fraud allegations. Let them wait, I replied, never taking my eyes off Marcus. I want to be thorough here. You can't do this, he tried, his voice cracking. We're engaged. We're getting married in St. Bart's. Ah, yes, the wedding. I smiled, thinking of the charges he'd racked up just hours ago. I'm afraid those deposits aren't going through. though I'm sure the prosecutors will be very interested in how you obtained my forged signatures for them. Through the glass, I could see more investigators arriving. The show was about to begin in earnest, but first, I had one last piece of documentation to share. Sarah placed a slim black laptop before me, its screen displaying a series of elegantly organized spreadsheets. Each tab represented a different victim of Marcus's schemes, their losses meticulously documented with timestamps, transaction records, and witness statements. "Recognize any of these names?" I asked, turning the screen toward him. "Amanda Porter, Sydney Chen, Rachel Goldman?" With each name, Marcus's complexion grew paler. All successful women who made the mistake of trusting you. All systematically defrauded through remarkably similar methods. That's not," he stammered, but his eyes betrayed recognition. "Not what, Marcus? Not provable?" I clicked. Through to another spreadsheet. "Each of these women has provided detailed testimony, bank records, witness statements, photographs, even some rather incriminating text messages you really should have deleted." Through the glass walls, I could see David being handcuffed by police officers, his earlier bravado replaced by quiet desperation. His eyes met Marcus's across the divide, a silent acknowledgement of their shared doom passing between them. "Ms. Morrison," Sarah interjected smoothly, "the SEC investigators would like to discuss the offshore accounts." Marcus's head snapped up. "What offshore accounts?" I smiled, remembering the late nights spent tracing his hidden money trails. "The ones in the Cayman Islands, Singapore, and surprisingly Manitoba." "Did you really think those would stay hidden?" Though I must admit, using my forged signatures to open them was a particularly bold move. "You can't prove," he began, but I was already pulling up the documentation. "Actually, we can. Your co-conspirator at First National was quite cooperative once we presented evidence of his involvement. It's amazing how quickly loyalty crumbles in the face of federal charges." Sarah's tablet chimed with new alerts. "His other victims are arriving downstairs," she reported. "All 7 of them." "7?" Marcus choked out. "That we've found so far," I corrected, watching his facade of confidence crumble further. "Though, given your pattern, I suspect there are more. That's why we're holding a press conference later, to encourage others to come forward." The door opened, admitting 2 stern-faced FBI agents. Marcus started to rise, but one raised her hand in a clear command to stay seated. "Mr. Lawrence," the female agent began, "we have some questions about your international banking activities." I gathered my papers, preparing to leave him to their tender mercies, but paused as Sarah showed me something on her tablet. "Ah, one more thing, Marcus. Remember that prenup you were so insistent about?" His eyes darted between me and the agents. "What about it? The real one you signed yesterday? It includes a fascinating clause about financial responsibility for criminal acts committed during the engagement period." I watched understanding dawn in his eyes. "Which means every dollar you charged to those fraudulent credit cards, every penny you transferred from those fake accounts, every expense you racked up while planning our fictional wedding, it's all your debt now, legally binding, with your witnessed signature." "That's impossible," he whispered, but there was no conviction in his voice. "Page 16, paragraph 4, I quoted from memory. You really should have read it before signing, though I suppose that's been a recurring theme in our relationship." The FBI agents were unpacking their briefcases, laying out document after document. Marcus stared at the growing pile of evidence with the dawning horror of a man watching his life implode. "Your mother called?" Sarah noted, checking her messages. "Apparently she's seen the news. She's not pleased about the money you borrowed from her retirement fund." I remembered the careful background investigation that had uncovered that particular crime. How he'd convinced his own mother to invest her savings in non-existent business ventures, all while bragging to me about his financial acumen. "The DA's office is ready," Sarah continued. They're particularly interested in the pattern of elder financial abuse. Marcus slumped in his chair, the last vestiges of his arrogance draining away. Through the glass, I could see more investigators arriving, more evidence being unpacked, more charges being prepared. "I'll leave you to your meeting," I told him, gathering my belongings. "I'm sure the agents have many questions about those creative accounting practices you've been employing." "Elizabeth, wait!" he called out desperately as I reached the door. "We can work this out. I'll pay everything back. We can still—" "Still what, Marcus? Still get married? Still build a life together?" I turned back, savoring his complete defeat. "I'm afraid the only relationship in your future will be with the federal prison system. Though look on the bright side. At least you'll have time to catch up on your reading, starting with all those documents you should have reviewed more carefully." As I walked away, Sarah fell into step beside me, her tablet displaying live feeds from various security cameras. On each screen, another piece of Marcus's criminal empire was being dismantled. "The other victims are assembled in the main conference room," she reported, ready to formally press charges. I nodded, thinking of the women whose lives Marcus had nearly destroyed. Today they would get not just justice, but restoration. After all, the best revenge isn't just about punishment, it's about making things right. The main conference room hummed with quiet conversation as I entered. 7 women, each accomplished in her own right, each bearing the invisible scars of Marcus's manipulation. They turned as one when I walked in, their expressions a complex mixture of determination and carefully contained anger. "Ladies," I greeted them, taking my place at the head of the table. "Thank you for coming today. I know this isn't easy." Claire Matthews, my key witness and now head of forensic accounting at Morrison & Partners, stepped forward. "We've reviewed the evidence packages your team prepared. They're comprehensive." "Very comprehensive," added Amanda Porter, a surgeon whose investment portfolio Marcus had systematically drained 2 years ago. "Though I have to ask, how did you manage to document everything so thoroughly?" Sarah dimmed the lights, bringing up a detailed timeline on the wall screen. Ms. Morrison began investigating Marcus Lawrence 18 months ago, after connecting patterns between several suspicious financial cases. I watched their faces as Sarah walked them through the investigation, the careful documentation, the surveillance, the paper trail that led from one victim to another. Each woman recognized her own story in the data, her own moment of devastating realization. The prenup scheme, Sidney Chen, a tech entrepreneur, noted with bitter recognition. He tried the same thing with me, made me think I was protecting my assets, when really, he was setting up complete control, Rachel Goldman finished, using our own legal documents against us. Through the glass walls, we could see the media assembling in the lobby below. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching skyward like mechanical flowers seeking sun. "Your statements today will be powerful," I told them, "but no one is obligated to speak publicly. Your written testimonies are more than sufficient for the prosecutors." "No," Claire said firmly, her hands steady as she arranged her notes. "We need to do this. How many others are out there thinking they're alone, thinking they were stupid for trusting him?" Sarah's tablet chimed with new alerts. "Speaking of others, we've received 4 more calls since the initial news broke. Women, recognizing his pattern, coming forward with similar stories." I nodded, unsurprised. Men like Marcus relied on their victims' shame and silence, counting on successful women to avoid the embarrassment of admitting they'd been deceived. Ms. Morrison, one of the FBI agents, appeared at the door. "We've finished our preliminary interview with Mr. Lawrence. He's asking to speak with you. Is he now?" I smiled, thinking of the security footage we'd gathered. "Let me guess. He's offering to explain everything if we meet privately." The agent's professional mask cracked slightly. "Almost word for word. He seems to think he can still charm his way out of this." "Record his reaction when you tell him that request was denied," I instructed. Add it to the evidence of his pattern of manipulation. Turning back to the assembled women, I saw the same steely determination I felt reflected in their eyes. Each had rebuilt her life after Marcus's betrayal, refusing to let his actions define her story. The press conference begins in 20 minutes, Sarah announced. We've arranged a separate room for anyone who wishes to review their statements, privately first. As the women gathered their materials, I caught fragments of their conversations, shared experiences, similar manipulation tactics, nearly identical lies he'd told each of them. Marcus had counted on their isolation, never imagining his victims would unite. Your team found something interesting in his recent emails, Sarah murmured, showing me her tablet. He was already researching his next target. A widowed hospital, administrator with significant family assets. I studied the emails, noting the familiar pattern, the careful background research, the planned accidental meeting, the strategy for presenting himself as the perfect understanding partner. Forward everything to the prosecutors, I instructed, and send an anonymous warning to the woman he was targeting. No one else falls victim to his schemes. Through the windows, I could see Marcus being escorted to a secure holding area, his designer suit wrinkled, his confident swagger replaced by defeated shuffling. David was already being processed in the basement, trading his Italian leather shoes for paper slippers. Their preliminary asset freeze is complete, Sarah reported. Every account, every property, every investment Marcus touched has been locked pending investigation. A quiet satisfaction settled over me as I watched the women prepare for their press statements. Marcus had chosen his victims carefully, successful, respected professionals whose very competence made them hesitate to admit they'd been deceived. Now that same strength and intelligence would ensure his downfall was absolute. It's time, Sarah announced softly. Below, the press room was filling with reporters, cameras ready to broadcast Marcus's exposure to the world. I straightened my jacket, preparing to lead these remarkable women into the next phase of our carefully orchestrated revelation. After all, the most satisfying revenge isn't just about exposing a criminal, it's about empowering his victims to reclaim their narratives. Camera flashes erupted as we entered the press room, the assembled journalists leaning forward in anticipation. The story had evolved far beyond a simple merger announcement. Hints of fraud, romance, and revenge had transformed it into the kind of scandal that careers are built on covering. I took my place at the podium, the 7 women arrayed behind. Me like an honor guard of justice. Their presence alone told a story that no amount of legal documentation could convey. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the professional sound system. You were invited here today to cover what appeared to be a straightforward corporate merger. However, that announcement was merely the catalyst for exposing something far more significant. Sarah's tablet displayed the real-time social media response as clips of my opening statement spread across multiple platforms. Marcus's name was already trending, his carefully curated online presence crumbling as victims and witnesses began sharing their stories. Over the past 5 years, Marcus Lawrence and his associates have conducted a systematic campaign of financial fraud, targeting successful professional women through a combination of romantic manipulation and legal deception. The room erupted with questions, but I held up my hand for silence. Behind me, security footage began playing on the massive screen. Marcus in various settings, with different women, always following the same calculated pattern of behavior. His methodology was consistent, I continued, gesturing to the evidence montage. Identify accomplished women with significant assets, orchestrate seemingly chance meetings, and gradually establish himself as both romantic partner and financial advisor. Through the glass partition separating the press room from the secure area, I could see Marcus watching the broadcast on a mounted TV. His face contorted as he realized the full scope of what was being revealed. Today, several of Mr. Lawrence's victims have chosen to speak publicly about their experiences. I stepped aside, allowing Claire Matthews to take the podium. Her voice, steady and clear, carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. "He approached me at a medical conference," she began, her professional demeanor unwavering. "Within 6 months, he had access to my investment accounts. Within a year, he had drained them completely." One by one, the women shared their stories. Each account added another layer to the portrait of Marcus's deception, each detail reinforcing the pattern of his crimes. The reporters were furiously taking notes, their earlier cynicism replaced by growing outrage. Ms. Morrison, a veteran journalist from the Financial Times, stood up. "Your own involvement with Mr. Lawrence, was it part of an investigation?" I smiled, thinking of the meticulous planning that had led to this moment. When I discovered Mr. Lawrence's pattern of behavior, I recognized an opportunity to gather irrefutable evidence. Every interaction, every document, every transaction over the past year has been carefully monitored and recorded. Sarah projected new images on the screen. Marcus signing the fake power of attorney, unknowingly confessing to his crimes, celebrating his apparent victory with increasingly damning boasts. 3 hours ago, federal authorities froze assets connected to Mr. Lawrence's schemes, I announced. Any victims who have not yet come forward are encouraged to contact the task force established to handle these cases. Through the partition, I watched Marcus slump in his chair as the magnitude of his exposure became clear. His carefully constructed world of lies and manipulation was being dismantled in prime time, broadcast across every major network. "We've received confirmation," Sarah murmured in my ear. 5 more victims have contacted the hotline since the press conference began. I nodded slightly, returning my attention to the reporters. "Moreover, our investigation has uncovered evidence of similar schemes operating in other cities. Mr. Lawrence's methodology appears to be part of a larger pattern of organized financial fraud targeting professional women." The revelation sparked another round of questions, but my attention was drawn to a new alert on Sarah's tablet. Marcus's former law firm had just released a statement formally severing all ties with him and initiating their own internal investigation. "Ladies and gentlemen," I concluded, "you'll find detailed evidence packets in your press materials. The victims you've heard from today demonstrate remarkable courage in coming forward. Their testimony will ensure that Mr. Lawrence and his associates face the full consequences of their actions." As the formal press conference transitioned into individual interviews, I watched the real-time impact rippling across various platforms. Marcus's professional reputation was being systematically demolished, his criminal behavior exposed in devastating detail. "His mother's attorney just called," Sarah reported quietly. "She's filing her own charges regarding the misappropriated retirement funds." Through the glass, I could see Marcus attempting to reach his phone, desperate to manage the growing crisis. But like everything else in his life, it had already been stripped away, leaving him to watch helplessly as his carefully constructed schemes crumbled into dust. The afternoon unfolded like a masterclass in systematic destruction. From my private office, I watched multiple screens tracking the cascade of consequences spreading through Marcus's world. Each hour brought new revelations, new accusations, new evidence of his elaborate fraud. "His country club just revoked his membership," Sarah reported, scanning updates on her tablet. "They're particularly unhappy about discovering he used forged documents to establish his financial credentials." I sipped my coffee, remembering how often Marcus had bragged about that exclusive membership. What about his board positions? Resignations demanded from all 6 charitable organizations. The Aichi Children's Hospital Foundation is particularly aggressive. Apparently, he'd been skimming from their endowment fund. Through the security feeds, I could see Marcus in the holding room, watching helplessly as his life imploded on national television. His usual polished appearance had crumbled, his designer suit wrinkled, his carefully styled hair disheveled, from running his hands through it repeatedly. "The Bar Association Ethics Committee has scheduled an emergency hearing," Sarah continued. They're moving to disbar him immediately, given the overwhelming evidence. I nodded, pulling up another screen displaying real-time social media analysis. Marcus's name was trending across all platforms, with former colleagues and acquaintances rushing to distance themselves from his toxic reputation. His fraternity brothers are turning on him, I noted, scanning the posts. Apparently, several of them introduced him to potential victims. Sarah's tablet chimed with new alerts. Speaking of introductions, 3 more women have come forward, all connected through his alumni network. The pattern's identical: professional success, recent personal loss, significant assets. Send their information to the task force, I instructed, and make sure our victim support team reaches out. They'll need guidance navigating the recovery process. The door opened, admitting Claire with a stack of financial reports. We've traced another offshore account, she announced, spreading documents across my desk. This one's in Dubai, hidden under layers of shell companies. I examined the transaction records, noting the familiar patterns. Let me guess. Opened with forged signatures. Better. Claire's smile held a hint of satisfaction. He used his mother's identity this time. Power of attorney obtained while she was recovering from surgery last year. Through the window, I could see more news vans arriving. The story had evolved beyond financial fraud into a broader exposé of systemic exploitation. Every hour brought new revelations, new victims, new evidence of Marcus's elaborate schemes. His former law partners talking, Sarah reported, reviewing surveillance footage. David's offering full cooperation in exchange for leniency. He's already named 3 other conspirators. I moved to stand by the window, watching the city below. Somewhere out there, other predators like Marcus were probably watching this unfold, realizing their own carefully constructed facades might not be as secure as they thought. The private school called? Sarah added, a note of irony in her voice. They want to return his donation and remove his name from the new library wing. Apparently, they've discovered the money came from his victims' accounts. A notification flashed on my screen. Marcus requesting another meeting, still believing he could somehow charm his way out of this situation. His desperation was becoming more evident with each passing hour. His sister's giving interviews, Claire noted, checking her phone. Claiming she tried to warn his victims, but was threatened into silence. Though our investigation suggests she was actually helping launder money through her art gallery, I reviewed the evidence against his family members, each document revealing new layers of complicity. The sister's gallery, the mother's retirement fund, even his teenage nephew's college fund, all had been used in Marcus's complex web of financial manipulation. The FBI's forensic team found something interesting, Sarah reported, pulling up new files. He kept detailed notes on potential targets, psychological profiles, financial assessments, vulnerability analyses. I examined the documents, feeling a cold anger at the calculated nature of his predation. Each woman had been carefully selected, her moments of vulnerability identified and exploited with surgical precision. Alert the prosecutors, I instructed. This proves premeditation across all cases. Through the security feed, I watched Marcus attempt to reach his phone again, desperate to manage the growing crisis. But his world had become a digital prison. Every device confiscated, every account frozen, every contact turning away from his toxic touch. His real estate agent called, Sarah added, scanning new messages. Those luxury properties he was so proud of, all purchased with fraudulent loans. The banks are already initiating foreclosure. I returned to my desk, reviewing the next phase of our plan. Marcus's exposure was just the beginning. His network of enablers, his professional connections, his social circle, all would be methodically examined and held accountable. Schedule. A meeting with the task force, I told Sarah. It's time to expand the investigation. After all, predators like Marcus rarely hunt alone. The task force assembled in my executive conference room, their faces illuminated by the glow of multiple screens displaying Marcus's network of conspirators. FBI agents, financial crime specialists, and forensic accountants gathered around the massive table, each adding pieces to our expanding puzzle. "We've identified a pattern at his sister's gallery," Agent Chen began, highlighting financial records. "Every major sale in the past 3 years correlates with a victim's investment withdrawal. Classic money laundering through art transactions." Sarah projected new evidence onto the main screen, elaborate webs of transactions, each designed to obscure the movement of stolen funds. "The gallery's appraiser was in on it," she added, artificially inflating values to justify the large transfers. "His sister's not happy about being implicated," Claire reported, reviewing surveillance feeds. "She's already offered to testify against Marcus in exchange for immunity. Claims he forced her participation." I studied the relationship diagrams spreading across our screens. Each connection revealed new layers of complicity, new partners in his schemes. "What about the banker at First National?" "Cooperating fully," Agent Chen confirmed. "He's provided documentation of at least 12 other fraudulent accounts Marcus established using various victims' identities. The bank's internal investigation has uncovered similar patterns with other clients." Through the security cameras, I watched Marcus being transferred to a more secure facility. His initial bravado had completely crumbled, replaced by the haunted look of a man watching his entire world dissolve. "The country club membership committee has been particularly helpful," Sarah noted, pulling up new files. "Apparently, Marcus used their social events to identify potential targets. They've provided guest lists, event photos, even security footage." I remembered the carefully orchestrated chance meetings he'd arranged, each one designed to position him as the perfect combination of successful professional and sympathetic confidant. Cross-reference those lists with his case files. Let's identify anyone he was grooming as future victims. His former law firm's internal review is revealing interesting patterns, Claire added, spreading new documents across the table. Several junior partners were involved in creating the fraudulent legal documents. They're all requesting plea deals. The investigation had grown beyond Marcus himself, exposing a culture of exploitation that had flourished in the shadows of professional success. Each revelation brought new perpetrators to light, new victims seeking justice. "The DA's office has something interesting," Sarah reported, checking her tablet. "Marcus's mentor from his early law days? He's been running similar schemes for decades. Marcus apparently learned the whole playbook from him." I moved to the window, watching news helicopters circle the building. The story had evolved from a simple fraud case into an exposé of systemic corruption. "What's the status on asset recovery?" "Forensic accounting has traced about 60% of the stolen funds," Agent Chen responded. "The offshore accounts are more complex, but we're making progress. His sister's cooperation has been particularly helpful in understanding their money movement patterns." A notification flashed across my screen. Marcus's mother had given a tearful interview, claiming ignorance of her children's crimes while simultaneously transferring properties into her grandchildren's names. "Flag those transfers," I instructed Sarah. "Add them to the asset freeze." "Already done," she confirmed. "The prosecutors are particularly interested in the timing." She initiated the transfers minutes after the press conference, suggesting prior knowledge of the schemes. The task force continued their methodical dissection of Marcus's world, each hour revealing new connections, new crimes, new layers of deception. His carefully constructed network was unraveling thread by thread, exposing everyone who had enabled or profited from his predation. "His college roommate's hedge fund is under investigation," Claire noted, bringing up more financial records. "Apparently they used similar tactics to target wealthy divorcees. The SEC's expanding their probe." I reviewed the growing evidence wall, where photographs and documents traced the evolution of Marcus's criminal enterprise. From his earliest schemes to his final attempted fraud against me, Each step showed increasing sophistication and decreasing conscience. The victim support team has been overwhelmed, Sarah reported quietly. We're up to 23 confirmed cases now, with more coming forward every hour. The pattern goes back at least 8 years. Through the security feeds, I watched another former victim arrive at the federal building to give her statement. Each woman's story added another piece to the puzzle, another thread in the tapestry of Marcus's destruction. Schedule a follow-up. Press conference, I instructed, turning back to the task force. It's time to make it clear that this investigation goes beyond one man's crimes. We're exposing an entire system of predation. After all, the most effective revenge doesn't just punish the guilty, it prevents future victims by destroying the infrastructure that enabled their crimes. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across my office as I reviewed the latest impact reports. 24 hours had passed since Marcus's world began to crumble, and the aftershocks were still rippling through the city's professional circles. The Ethics Committee's findings just came in, Sarah announced, placing a thick folder on my desk. They've identified 13 other attorneys who helped create fraudulent documents. 3 judges are also under investigation for expediting suspicious financial orders. I scanned the names, recognizing several from Marcus's carefully cultivated social circle. Any connection to his mentor's cases? Significant overlap. The committee's expanding their investigation to cover the past 15 years. They've already uncovered a pattern of coordinated legal manipulation targeting wealthy women. Through the window, I could see film crews setting up for evening broadcasts. The story had captured national attention, sparking discussions about financial predation and systemic exploitation. Marcus's former clients are panicking, Claire reported, entering with new financial analyses. Our forensic team found evidence that he used similar tactics in legitimate business deals. Several major corporations are initiating internal audits. Sarah's tablet chimed with updates. His sister's art gallery is facing multiple lawsuits. Apparently, she didn't just launder money, she was actively recruiting victims through charity auctions and gallery events. I moved to the evidence wall, where photographs and documents traced an ever-expanding web of deception. What about the country club connection? The membership committee's cooperation opened several new avenues, Claire explained, highlighting specific records. 3 board members were involved in identifying potential targets. They used charity events and social functions to profile wealthy women, especially recent widows or divorcees. A notification flashed on my screen. Marcus's mother had attempted to access frozen accounts through a series of elaborate proxy arrangements. Flag those transactions for the prosecutors, I instructed. Add them to the pattern of family involvement. Already done, Sarah confirmed. The FBI's particularly interested in her role. Turns out she wasn't just a victim, she was actively helping Marcus establish credibility with older targets. The security feeds showed new victims arriving at the federal building, each bringing stories that fit Marcus's methodical pattern of exploitation. Professional women, carefully selected and systematically deceived, their success turned against them through sophisticated manipulation. His former law partner's confession is proving valuable, Claire noted, reviewing transcripts. David's exposed an entire network of financial advisors who helped hide stolen assets. They called themselves the Gentlemen's Investment Club. I remembered Marcus's frequent evening meetings, his casual mentions of exclusive investment opportunities. Each detail of his life was being revealed as carefully orchestrated theater, designed to create an illusion of legitimate success. The DA's office has updated their charges, Sarah reported, projecting new documents. They're treating this as an organized criminal enterprise. RICO provisions mean they can seize assets from everyone involved. Through the security feeds, I watched Marcus's sister being escorted from her gallery by federal agents. Her designer outfit and carefully maintained composure couldn't hide the fear in her eyes as reporters shouted questions about her role in the scheme. The victim support team needs more resources, Claire said quietly. We're seeing a pattern of psychological manipulation that goes beyond financial fraud. Many women are just now recognizing how deeply they were deceived. I thought of the careful documentation we'd gathered, the way Marcus and his associates had studied their victims, exploiting personal tragedies and professional pressures to create vulnerability. His alma mater called, Sarah added, checking messages. They're removing him from the alumni board and rescinding his Distinguished Graduate Award. Several large donors threatened to withdraw support after learning about his use of university events to target victims. The investigation had moved beyond individual crimes into an exposé of social exploitation. Each layer we uncovered revealed how Marcus and his associates had twisted professional networks and respected institutions into hunting grounds. The private bank's audit is revealing interesting patterns, Claire reported, spreading new financial records across my desk. They've identified similar schemes operating in other cities. This could be part of a national network. I studied the transaction patterns, recognizing the sophisticated movements of stolen funds. Share everything with the federal task force. If there are others running similar operations, we need to shut them down. Marcus's mentor is reportedly negotiating a plea deal, Sarah noted. He's offering information about organized fraud rings operating across multiple states. The FBI's setting up a dedicated unit to handle the expanded investigation. Through my window, I could see the city's lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. Somewhere out there, other predators like Marcus were watching their carefully constructed schemes begin to unravel, realizing that their time in the shadows was coming to an end. The next morning brought a flood of new revelations as the investigation expanded beyond state lines. My office had transformed into a command center, with federal agents and forensic specialists coordinating investigations across multiple jurisdictions. Chicago Division just reported in, Sarah announced, updating our national tracking map. They've identified a mirror operation running the same playbook. 3 attorneys, 2 financial advisors, and a private banker, all connected to Marcus's mentor. I studied the growing network displayed on our screens, each node representing another predator, another group of victims, another web of sophisticated fraud. Pattern match? Almost identical, Claire confirmed, spreading new case files across the conference table. They even used the same legal templates Marcus favored. The only difference is they targeted recently divorced executives instead of widows. Through the security feeds, I watched Marcus being interviewed by federal prosecutors. His designer suit had been replaced by prison orange, his usual confidence shattered by the magnitude of what he'd helped expose. His mentor's testimony is proving invaluable, Sarah noted, reviewing transcripts. He's naming names across 6 states. Apparently, they called themselves the Fellowship, an organized network of professional predators sharing techniques and target lists. Agent Chen entered with fresh intelligence from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. We've linked 15 private banks to the scheme. Their wealth management divisions were instrumental in hiding stolen assets. I moved to the evidence wall, where photographs and documents now traced criminal connections across the country. What about the art angle? Marcus's sister's gallery was just one node in a larger laundering network, Claire explained, highlighting specific transactions. We've identified similar operations in New York, Miami, and Los Angeles, all using overvalued art sales to clean stolen funds. Sarah's tablet chimed with urgent updates. The Bar Association's investigation has gone national. They're reviewing every case handled by suspected network members. Hundreds of financial orders may have been compromised. Through my window, I could see more news vans arriving. What had started as a local scandal had evolved into a national story of organized exploitation. Major networks were running special reports on professional predators and financial fraud. Marcus's former fraternity brothers are turning on each other, Claire reported, monitoring social media chatter. Apparently, they had an informal system for identifying potential victims at alumni events. They called it prospect sharing. I remembered the carefully casual way Marcus had mentioned his fraternity connections. how he'd used those networks to establish credibility with targets. Any connection to the university fundraising circuit? Significant. Overlap, Sarah confirmed, pulling up donor lists. They specifically targeted women who attended charity galas and educational fundraisers. The FBI's investigating several university development officers who may have sold confidential donor information. A notification flashed. Another victim had come forward, this time from Seattle. Her story matched the pattern perfectly. Successful. Professional, recent personal loss, targeted through seemingly legitimate social connections. The victim support network needs to go national, I decided, reviewing the expanding case list. Set up coordination with women's professional organizations in major cities. We need to create safe channels for victims to come forward. Already in progress, Claire nodded. Several national law firms have offered pro bono services. They're establishing dedicated teams to handle victim representation and asset recovery. The investigation had grown beyond any single case or jurisdiction. Each hour brought new revelations, new connections, new understanding of how deeply this network had infiltrated professional circles. Marcus's mother tried something interesting, Sarah reported, checking security alerts. She attempted to access his offshore accounts using old power of attorney documents. The timestamps suggest she knew about these accounts all along. I watched the real-time tracking of attempted financial movements, each transaction revealing new layers of family complicity. Add it to the conspiracy evidence. The prosecutors will be interested in the timing. His sister's art gallery clients are facing scrutiny, Claire added, reviewing financial records. Several collectors apparently knew they were overpaying for artwork to help hide stolen funds. The IRS is opening a separate investigation into art-based tax fraud. The scope of the investigation had expanded far beyond our initial expectations. What began as revenge against one man's betrayal had exposed an entire ecosystem of sophisticated predation. The FBI is creating a dedicated task force, Agent Chen announced, returning with new directives. They're calling it Operation Glasshouse, targeting professional predators who exploit social networks for financial fraud. I moved to stand by the window, watching the city below. Somewhere out there, other victims were probably watching this unfold, recognizing their own stories in the pattern of deception we'd exposed. Schedule a briefing with the National Press Corps, I instructed Sarah. It's time to make sure every potential victim knows what to watch for. The best defense against predators is an informed target. The National Press briefing room buzzed with anticipation as journalists from across the country assembled. In the 48 hours since Marcus's exposure, the story had evolved from a personal revenge tale into a watershed moment for financial crimes awareness. Major networks are carrying this live, Sarah reported, reviewing the media attendance list. Financial channels have suspended regular coverage to focus on the investigation. Social media engagement is unprecedented. I adjusted my jacket, preparing to address the gathered press. The woman they would see today wasn't Marcus's deceived fiancé or even the revealed CEO. She was the catalyst for systematic change. Senate Banking Committee just announced emergency hearings, Claire added, showing me the breaking news alert. They're calling for immediate review of private banking regulations and legal oversight of wealth management services. Through the monitors, I could see Marcus in his holding cell, watching the coverage with increasing despair. His world hadn't just collapsed, it had become the key that unlocked a nationwide awakening. The American Bar Association's Ethics Commission has launched a comprehensive review, Sarah noted, checking updates. They're examining how predatory networks exploited legal credentials to facilitate fraud. Several state bars are following suit. I studied the latest victim impact statistics displayed on my tablet. What's the current count? 12 confirmed cases across 23 states, Claire reported. The victim support network is overwhelmed with new reports. Each story follows the same sophisticated pattern of social manipulation and financial exploitation. The evidence wall had grown beyond Marcus's crimes to display a national map of connected cases. Red pins marked known predators, blue showed confirmed victims, and yellow highlighted suspected operations still under investigation. His mentor's testimony opened unexpected doors, Sarah said, reviewing FBI updates. He's exposed connections to private equity firms, real estate development groups, even political fundraising circles. They all used similar methods to identify and exploit wealthy women. Agent Chen appeared with fresh intelligence. We've linked the network to several exclusive country clubs. Their membership committees were essentially screening potential victims, providing detailed financial profiles to predatory members. I remembered how Marcus had insisted on joining certain clubs, always explaining it as professional networking. Each aspect of his life was being revealed as carefully calculated predation. The financial industry is responding, Claire noted, monitoring market reactions. Major banks are announcing enhanced due diligence procedures for wealth management. Clients, private banking services are under intense scrutiny. Sarah's tablet chimed with new alerts. Women's professional organizations are mobilizing nationwide. They're establishing verification networks for financial advisors and creating secure channels for members to report suspicious behavior. Through the press room windows, I could see more satellite trucks arriving. The story had captured public imagination, sparking discussions about gender-based financial exploitation and the weaponization of professional credentials. Marcus's former fraternity released a statement, Claire reported, displaying their press release. They're launching an internal investigation into how their alumni network was used to facilitate fraud. Several other Greek organizations are following their lead. I reviewed my speaking notes, though I hardly needed them. The pattern we'd exposed was burned into my memory through months of careful documentation. The SEC's expanded their investigation, Sarah added, highlighting new developments. They're examining how the network used art markets and real estate transactions to hide stolen assets. Several major auction houses are under scrutiny. The scope of change sparked by Marcus's exposure had exceeded my initial plans for revenge. What began as a personal mission had evolved into a movement for institutional reform. University development offices are implementing new donor protection protocols, Claire noted, reviewing institutional responses. They're particularly concerned about how wealthy alumni were targeted through educational fundraising events. Agent Chen returned with updates from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Operation Glasshouse has expanded to 36 field offices. We're seeing similar patterns of organized predation in every major metropolitan area. I moved to the podium, preparing to address the waiting press. The story I would tell wasn't just about Marcus's crimes or my elaborate trap. It was about exposing a system that had enabled predators to operate in plain sight. Congress members are already drafting new legislation, Sarah reported quietly. They're calling it the Professional Predator Prevention Act. Your case is being cited as the catalyst. Through the monitors, I could see Marcus watching, his expression a mixture of disbelief and dawning comprehension. He had thought himself a master manipulator, never realizing he was merely one node in a network that was about to be dismantled. It's time, I told Sarah, gathering my materials. Let's make sure every potential victim knows what to watch for. Every enabler understands they'll be exposed, and every predator realizes their hunting grounds are being destroyed. 3 days after the initial exposure, I sat in my office reviewing the transformative impact of our investigation. The morning sun painted the city skyline in shades of possibility, highlighting a world fundamentally changed by Marcus's downfall. The federal task force has released their preliminary findings, Sarah announced, entering with a comprehensive report. They've identified over 300 potential victims across the country. Recovery teams are already tracking stolen assets through international banking networks. I studied the latest statistics, each number representing a life impacted by sophisticated predation. What's the estimated total? Conservative estimates put it at $2.1 billion in stolen assets, Claire responded, spreading financial analyses across my desk. The network was more extensive than anyone imagined. They had infiltrated every level of wealth management and legal services. Through the security feeds, I watched Marcus being prepared for transfer to federal custody. His expensive suits and confident swagger had been replaced by prison scrubs and defeated shuffling. His sister's cooperation is proving invaluable, Sarah noted, reviewing new evidence. She's exposed an entire shadow network of art dealers and gallery owners who specialized in laundering stolen funds. The FBI's Art Crimes Unit is now involved. Agent Chen arrived with updates from the nationwide investigation. We've identified similar operations in every major financial center. Each city had its own network of predators using the same methodologies. Marcus employed. I moved to the evidence wall, where our original documentation of Marcus's schemes had grown into a comprehensive map of organized financial predation. What about the legal enablers? The Bar Association's review has uncovered systemic issues, Claire explained, highlighting specific cases. They've already suspended 43 attorneys across 12 states. More disbarments are pending as the investigation expands. Sarah's tablet chimed with breaking news. Marcus's mentor just finished his federal deposition. He's provided names, dates, and documentation going back 2 decades. The prosecutors are calling it a roadmap of professional predation. Through my window, I could see camera crews setting up for another day of coverage. The story had maintained its grip on public attention, sparking a national conversation about financial exploitation and professional trust. The Victim Support Network has gone international, Claire reported, pulling up global statistics. We're receiving inquiries from women's professional organizations in Europe and Asia. They're reporting similar patterns of organized predation. I reviewed the latest impact assessment, noting how our exposure of Marcus's schemes had triggered a cascade of institutional reforms. Updates on the legislative response? The Senate Banking Committee's draft bill is gaining bipartisan support, Sarah confirmed. They're proposing mandatory fraud detection systems for private banking services and enhanced oversight of wealth management professionals. The investigation had evolved beyond criminal prosecution into comprehensive system reform. Each day brought new initiatives designed to protect vulnerable individuals from sophisticated financial predators. Marcus's former law firm is facing serious repercussions, Claire noted, displaying their stock performance. Their involvement in the scheme has triggered a mass exodus of clients. Several major corporations have terminated their retainers. Through the security feeds, I watched David being processed for federal detention. His earlier cooperation hadn't spared him from accountability, though it had exposed crucial details about the network's operations. The private banking sector is implementing immediate changes, Sarah reported, reviewing industry responses. They're establishing enhanced verification protocols for wealth management services and creating dedicated fraud prevention units. Agent Chen returned with updates from Operation Glass House. We're seeing a domino effect in professional circles. Members of the network are turning on each other, each revelation exposing new layers of organized exploitation. I studied the latest victim recovery statistics. What's the status on asset restitution? The forensic accounting team has traced approximately 70% of stolen funds, Claire responded. The network's use of art sales and real estate transactions actually created a detailed paper trail once we knew what to look for. Sarah's tablet displayed new alerts from the Victim Support Network. Women's professional organizations are establishing mutual protection protocols. They're creating verified databases of financial advisors and implementing peer review systems for wealth management services. Through the monitors, I watched Marcus's mother being questioned by federal investigators. Her attempts to shield family assets had only strengthened the prosecution's case for organized criminal enterprise. The art world is undergoing significant changes, Claire noted, reviewing market responses. Major galleries and auction houses are implementing enhanced due diligence procedures. The days of using art sales for easy money laundering are ending. I moved to stand by the window, reflecting on how our carefully planned revenge had triggered a revolution in financial security. What began as a personal mission to expose one predator had evolved into a movement for systematic change. Schedule. A meeting with the victim advocacy team, I instructed Sarah. It's time to establish permanent support structures. This isn't just about punishing predators anymore. It's about ensuring they never find hunting grounds again. 1 week after Marcus's world imploded, I stood in my office watching the sunset paint the city in shades of vindication. The transformation, triggered by our investigation, had exceeded even my most ambitious expectations. Final victim count is in, Sarah reported, entering with the comprehensive assessment. 432 confirmed cases across 28 states. The recovery teams have already secured nearly $3 billion in stolen assets. I reviewed the latest statistics, each number representing not just justice served, but lives rebuilt. Status on Marcus? Accepted a plea deal this morning, Claire confirmed, displaying the federal agreement. 25 years minimum, full. Cooperation with ongoing investigations and complete forfeiture of all assets. His testimony has already launched 3 new federal task forces. Through the security feeds, I watched as boxes of evidence were wheeled into federal storage. Each file, each recording, each document represented another thread in our tapestry of justice. His sister's art gallery network is completely dismantled, Sarah noted, checking updates. The FBI's Art Crimes Unit has seized over $500 million in laundered assets. Several major auction houses are now under federal monitoring. Agent Chen arrived with the final report from Operation Glass House. We've identified similar networks in 12 countries. Interpol is coordinating an international response to professional predation schemes. I moved to the evidence wall, now transformed into a blueprint for financial crime prevention. What about the institutional reforms? The Senate bill passed with overwhelming support, Claire reported, highlighting legislative victories. Private. Banking services are implementing mandatory fraud detection systems. The legal profession is establishing new ethical oversight protocols. Sarah's tablet displayed breaking news from the financial sector. Major banks are announcing permanent changes to wealth management practices. They're creating dedicated teams to protect vulnerable clients from sophisticated predation. Through my window, I could see the last news trucks departing. The story had evolved from scandal to catalyst, sparking lasting changes in how society protects individuals from financial exploitation. The Victim Support Network has gone global, Claire noted, reviewing international initiatives. Women's. Professional organizations worldwide are implementing our protection protocols. They're calling it the Morrison Standard for Financial Security. I examined the latest impact assessment, noting how our exposure of Marcus's schemes had triggered a renaissance in professional ethics. Updates on the legal community? The Bar Association's reforms are comprehensive, Sarah confirmed. They're establishing mandatory background checks for wealth management attorneys and creating a national database of financial predation cases. What began as personal revenge had evolved into a legacy of protection. Each new safeguard, each reformed system, each strengthened protocol ensured that future predators would find no easy prey. Marcus's former clients are facing their own reckonings, Claire added, displaying corporate responses. Major companies are implementing enhanced due diligence procedures. The days of unchecked financial manipulation are ending. Through the security feeds, I watched as David was escorted to his federal sentencing. His cooperation had exposed crucial aspects of the network, but couldn't erase his role in countless lives destroyed. The private banking sector transformation is remarkable, Sarah reported, reviewing industry changes. They're establishing permanent fraud prevention units and creating secure channels for reporting suspicious activities. Agent Chen returned with updates from the International Task Force. Similar investigations are launching in financial centers worldwide. Your case has become a template for exposing organized financial predation. I studied the victim recovery. Statistics displayed across my screens. Status on restitution? The forensic team has traced nearly 90% of stolen assets, Claire responded. The network's elaborate money laundering actually created perfect documentation once I knew where to look. Sarah's tablet showed real-time updates from the Victim Support Network. Professional organizations are implementing permanent protection systems. Every major financial center now has dedicated resources for identifying and preventing sophisticated fraud. Through the monitors, I watched Marcus being led to his new federal residence. His designer world had been replaced by concrete and steel. His hunting grounds transformed into a cautionary tale. Your father would be proud, Claire said quietly, breaking protocol to acknowledge the personal aspect of our victory. You didn't just get revenge. You created lasting change. I touched the law books on my shelf, remembering his lessons about justice and responsibility. Schedule a meeting with the International Advisory Board, I instructed Sarah. It's time to establish permanent oversight structures. The sun had fully set now, the city lights below twinkling like stars of possibility. What started as one woman's quest for revenge had evolved into a global movement for protection and empowerment. One last thing, Sarah added, checking her. Final updates. The Victims Advocacy Group has a request. They want to establish an annual award in your name, recognizing individuals who expose and prevent financial predation. I smiled, thinking of how Marcus's attempt to deceive me had instead triggered a revolution in financial security. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't just about punishing the guilty, it's about ensuring their crimes never harm another soul again. Up. Next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.